A simple midwife pulled a drowning man from a frozen lake. She thought she was saving a stranger's life. But the moment his eyes opened, and she recognized the face of the king himself, she realized she had just made the most dangerous mistake of her existence. Because 6 months earlier, in that same humble cabin where she would nurse him back to health, she had committed an unforgivable crime, one that would destroy everything if the truth ever came to light. Now, trapped together in a space barely large enough for secrets, she would discover that the king carried a burden far heavier than his crown. A truth about his own identity so devastating that it had driven him into those freezing waters, seeking an escape from a lie that had poisoned an entire kingdom for nearly 4 decades. As the king's fevered confessions began to unravel mysteries buried since the night of his birth, the midwife felt the walls closing in. Because the man she had murdered to protect the throne, the body she had buried in the woods behind her cabin, the secret she had sworn would die with her, all of it was about to collide with a truth neither of them could escape. And when the king finally demanded answers about his real family, about the blood that actually ran through his veins, she would be forced to choose between a confession that would damn her forever or a silence that would destroy the last shred of humanity she had left. What happens when the person you saved is the one person who can never know what you've done? And what price are you willing to pay when the only way to protect a kingdom is to let a guilty soul walk free? The smell hit Solveig before the scream did. Metallic, sharp, the kind of smell that clings to your throat and refuses to let go. She dropped the basket of herbs, her fingers already trembling, and ran toward the lake where the ice had begun its slow, treacherous thaw. Someone was dying. She knew it the way a mother knows her child is hurt before. Seeing the wound, a primal certainty that lives in the marrow of your bones. The water was black against the pale morning sky, and there, thrashing in the center of the lake, was a man. Not just any man, even from the shore. Even with his face contorted in terror and his arms fighting against the current that pulled him under, she recognized the bearing, the way he held his head even as he drowned. Nobility, or worse. Her heart slammed against her ribs. 6 months. It had been exactly 6 months. 2 weeks and 4 days since she had watched another man die. Since she had placed the powder in his cup with hands steadier than they had any right to be. Since she had become a murderer. The ice cracked beneath her boots as she ran. Each step was a prayer and a confession. The lake fought her, the water so cold it felt like knives sliding between her bones. But she pushed forward. Her fingers found fabric, then an arm, then the desperate grip of a man who thought he would die alone. She pulled. God, how she pulled. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned. The shore felt miles away even though it was only 20 feet. When they finally collapsed onto solid ground, the man was blue. His lips were the color of a fresh bruise, and for one horrible moment, Solveig thought she was too late. That fate had made her a killer twice. She pressed her hands against his chest, pumping the way her mother had taught her 31 years ago when she was just a child learning the craft of saving. Lives. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe. Water erupted from his mouth. He gasped, choked, gasped again. His eyes flew open and Solveig felt her stomach drop through the frozen earth beneath her knees. She knew those eyes. Everyone in the kingdom knew those eyes. They were painted in the great hall of every noble house, carved into the wooden beams of every church. Magnus, King Magnus the Just, the man who had ruled for 18 years with a steady hand and a reputation for fairness that made other monarchs seem like tyrants. He was staring at her, his chest heaving, his whole body shaking so violently she could hear his teeth chattering. But there was something in his gaze that stopped her cold. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't relief. It was something darker. Something that looked almost like disappointment. Why? The word came out broken, barely a whisper. Why did you save me? Solveig's hands were still pressed against his chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of his heart. A heart that should have stopped. A heart that he seemed to wish had stopped. The realization crashed into her like a second wave. He hadn't fallen into the lake. He had chosen it. He had walked into that water the same way she had walked into that room 6 months ago with poison in her pocket and murder in her heart. She should have felt honored, awed, terrified. She was kneeling in the mud with the king of the realm, the man whose word could mean life or death for thousands. But all she felt was a sick sense of recognition. She was looking at a mirror. "Your Majesty," she managed, her voice cracking. "I didn't know. I couldn't just... Don't." He cut her off, trying to sit up. His hand caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a man who had just been drowning. "Don't call me that. Not here. Not now." His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her want to run. What was he looking for? What did he see? Could he sense it on her, the way animals sense predators? Could he smell the guilt that had soaked into her skin like rosewater, permanent and poisonous? "Who are you?" he asked. "Solvi. I'm the midwife. From the village." Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. Hollow. Like someone else was speaking through her mouth. Something flickered across his face, a spasm of emotion too quick to name. "A midwife," he repeated, and there was a bitterness in his tone that made no sense. Of course it would be a midwife. She didn't understand what he meant, didn't understand the way he was looking at her, like she had just confirmed something terrible. Her cabin was only a quarter-mile away, hidden in the birch trees where she could work in peace, where she could avoid questions, where she had thought she could avoid the weight of what she'd done. "We need to get you warm," she said, because that was something she understood, something she could control. "You'll die of the cold if we don't move now." He laughed, actually laughed. It was a horrible sound, sharp and broken like glass grinding beneath a boot. "Will I?" He looked back at the lake, and Solvi felt ice that had nothing to do with the water spread through her chest. Perhaps that would have been simpler. She pulled him to his feet, supporting his weight even though he was nearly twice her size. He didn't resist, didn't argue. Just let her guide him toward the tree line, his body shaking so hard she thought his bones might crack. The morning sun was rising behind them, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, beautiful and terrible and completely indifferent to the two broken people stumbling through it. As they walked, Solveig felt the weight of 6 months pressing down on her shoulders, the weight of the poison, the weight of the body she had buried in the woods behind her cabin, the weight of the secret that had carved itself into her soul like a brand. And now this, a king who wanted to die, a king she had saved. Against his will. The cabin appeared through the trees, smoke curling from the chimney she had left burning. Home. Or what passed for home when you could no longer look at yourself in any reflective surface without seeing a killer staring back. Magnus stumbled on the threshold, and she caught him, her hands finding the curve of his ribs. He was trembling. They both were. And as she guided him inside, closing the door against the cold and the world and everything that waited beyond these walls, Solveig realized with a clarity that made her want to scream, this man, this king, this stranger who wanted to die. He was about to destroy whatever fragile peace she had managed to build from the ruins of her conscience. Because she recognized that look in his eyes, the look of someone carrying a secret too heavy to bear alone. The fire crackled between them like a living thing, casting shadows that danced across Magnus's face in ways that made him look older than his 38 years. Solveig wrapped another wool blanket around his shoulders, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent 3 decades caring for bodies that refused to cooperate with the will to live. His skin was still too pale, his breathing still too shallow, but the violent shaking had finally stopped. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt her stomach twisting into knots that pulled tighter with every passing moment. The king was in her cabin. The king who had tried to drown himself in a frozen lake. The king who sat now staring into her fireplace with eyes that held the kind of emptiness she recognized from her own reflection. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why would you? She couldn't finish, couldn't speak the words that would make it real. Magnus didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the flames, watching them consume the birch logs she had cut last autumn when the world still made sense. "Have you ever discovered," he said, slowly, each word careful and deliberate, "that everything you believed about yourself was a lie?" Solveig's hands froze on the kettle she was preparing. The metal suddenly felt too hot against her palms, burning in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. "Yes," she wanted to scream. "Yes, I know exactly what that feels like. I know what it's like to become someone you don't recognize, someone capable of crushing herbs into powder and stirring them into tea and watching a man's eyes go wide, with the realization that he's been poisoned." "I don't understand, Your Majesty," she said instead, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you not to call me that." There was an edge to his words now, sharp enough to draw blood. He finally turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her want to step back. "That title belongs to someone else, someone who died before he could ever wear the crown." The kettle slipped from her fingers. It hit the stone floor with a clang that echoed through the small cabin like a bell tolling for the dead. Solveig stared at him, her mind racing, trying to make sense of words that couldn't possibly mean what they seemed to mean. "I don't know who I am," Magnus continued, and now his voice was breaking, cracking like the ice on the lake. "But I know who I'm not. I'm not the son of King Harold. I'm not the heir to the throne of this realm. I'm not the man who has spent 18 years making decisions that affect thousands of lives." He laughed. Again, that same horrible sound from the lake. "I'm an imposter, a fraud, a placeholder for a dead man." Solveig's legs gave out. She sank onto the wooden stool beside her work table, the table where she ground herbs and mixed tinctures and prepared remedies that were supposed to heal, not kill. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples, behind her eyes, in the tips of her fingers that had gone numb. "How long have you known?" The question came from somewhere deep inside. Her, from the part that had carried a secret for 31 years. "A year." Magnus wrapped the blanket tighter around himself, but Solveig knew it wasn't the cold he was trying to escape. "I found letters, hidden in my mother's chambers after she died. Letters from the midwife who delivered me. Letters describing the switch." The room tilted. Solveig gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her breath coming in short gasps that didn't seem to bring any air into her lungs. The midwife. The royal midwife, her mother's teacher. The woman who had taken a 7-year-old girl to the castle that night 38 years ago because she needed an extra pair of hands. The woman who had whispered urgently in the darkness while 2 babies cried and a queen lay exhausted in her bed. The real prince was weak, Magnus said, and Solveig heard the words as if from a great distance, as if she were drowning again, but this time there was no one to pull her to shore. Born too early, too small. The midwife knew he wouldn't survive the night. She also knew that if the heir died, the kingdom would tear itself apart. There were already 3 nobles waiting for any sign of weakness, ready to claim the throne for themselves. Solveig's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table, but it didn't help. Nothing helped. She could see it so clearly now, as if she were back in that room. The panic in the midwife's eyes. The 2 infants, one strong and screaming, one barely. Breathing. The choice that wasn't really a choice at all. There was a peasant woman. Magnus continued, his voice hollow. She had given birth the same night, just hours before the queen. A healthy boy. Strong. Perfect. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. The midwife took him right from his mother's arms while she slept and placed him in the royal cradle. And the dying prince, she gave him to the peasant woman. "Stop." Solveig's voice cracked like breaking pottery. "Please stop." But Magnus couldn't stop. It was pouring out of him now. A confession that had been festering for a year, poisoning him from the inside the way the powder had poisoned the man who came to her cabin 6 months ago. The real prince died 3 days later. The peasant woman never knew her own son was alive, growing up in a castle, wearing a crown that should have belonged to someone else. And I never knew that somewhere out there, I had a real mother who probably spent her entire life mourning a child who never existed. Solveig's throat was closing. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls of the cabin were pressing in, suffocating her with the weight of a secret she had carried since she was 7 years old. A secret she had watched unfold with child's eyes that understood nothing except that something terrible and necessary was happening. "I've spent a year searching," Magnus said, and now there were tears running down his face, cutting tracks through the dirt and lake water, searching for any trace of the family I came from, searching for the woman who gave birth to me, searching for proof that I belong somewhere, to someone, to anything real. His hands clenched into fists. "I found nothing. It's like they never existed. Like I never existed." Solveig's vision was blurring. She could feel the sob building in her chest, clawing its way up her throat, threatening to tear her apart. She knew exactly why he had found nothing. She knew. Because 6 months ago, a man had appeared at her door. A man with eyes the same shade as the king's. A man who carried a letter from the old midwife, written before she died, confessing everything. A man who claimed to be the true heir to the throne. And Solveig had killed him, had crushed the monk's hood into his evening tea and watched him die because she couldn't let the kingdom fall into civil war. Because she believed she was protecting thousands of innocent lives. Because she thought she was making an impossible choice for the greater good. "There's something you should know," Magnus said, and the way he looked at her made Solveig's blood run cold. The midwife who made the switch. Her name was Greta. She had an apprentice that night, a child who helped with the birth. The sob finally broke free. Solveig covered her mouth with both hands, but it was too late. The sound filled the cabin, raw and anguished and completely damning. Magnus stood up, the blanket falling from his shoulders. "You were there, weren't you?" His voice was soft now, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it that made Solveig want to run. "You saw it happen. You've known all along what I am." She couldn't speak, could only nod, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking with the force of 31 years of silence crashing down around her. "Then tell me," Magnus whispered, moving closer. "Tell me who I really am. Tell me where I came from. Tell me if there's anyone left in this world who remembers the truth." And Solveig realized, with a horror that eclipsed everything else, that she was about to destroy the last thing this broken king had left. Hope. The words wouldn't come. Solveig opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish drowning in air. Magnus was standing less than 3 feet away now, close enough that she could see the desperation carved into every line of his face. Close enough that she could smell the lake water still clinging to his clothes, cold and dark and final as a grave. "I was 7 years old," she finally managed, her voice so quiet it barely disturbed the air between them. "My mother was Greta's apprentice. We lived in a small cottage on the edge of the royal grounds. That night, a servant came running, saying the queen had gone into labor early and Greta needed help. She closed her eyes, but it didn't help. The memories were there anyway, vivid and terrible. I remember the fear, the way everyone moved too. Quickly, spoke too loudly. Something was wrong before we even arrived." Magnus didn't move, didn't breathe. He was a statue carved from desperation and need. The queen was exhausted. She'd been laboring for hours. When the baby finally came, he was so small. Solveig's hands twisted in her lap, fingers knotting together until the joints ached. Blue around the lips, barely crying. Greta held him up to the candlelight and I saw her face change. I didn't understand it then, but I understand it now. She knew he was dying. And the other baby? Magnus's voice was hoarse, scraped raw. Where did I come from? There was a woman in the servants' quarters, a kitchen maid named Era. She had given birth just hours before the queen, alone in her room because no one thought a servant's baby mattered enough to call for help. Solveig forced herself to look at him, to meet those eyes that were so desperate for answers she felt like she was being torn apart. My mother had checked on her earlier that evening. The baby was healthy, strong, perfect in every way. Magnus's legs seemed to give out. He sank back onto the chair, his hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles turned white. "Era," he whispered, testing the name like a prayer. My mother's name was Ira. Greta made the decision in seconds. I watched her wrap the prince in plain cloth, wrap you in royal silk. She moved so quickly, like if she hesitated even for a moment she would lose her nerve. Solveig's throat was burning. She told my mother to take the prince to Era's room, to place him in the cradle while she slept. She told her to bring you back. And my mother never knew. It wasn't a question. Magnus was staring at the floor, his whole body rigid with a pain that went deeper than flesh, deeper than bone. She woke up to find a dying baby in her arms and thought he was her son. He lived for 3 days. The words felt like stones in Solveig's mouth. My mother told me later, years later, when I was old enough to understand. Era held him the entire time, sang to him, whispered promises about the life they would have together. And when he died, something inside her broke. Magnus's breath hitched. What happened to her? This was the part that had haunted Solveig for 31 years. The part that made her understand, in ways a child shouldn't understand, that some choices destroy everyone they touch. She threw herself into the well behind the servants' quarters 2 weeks later. They found her body at dawn, still clutching a lock of the baby's hair. The sound that came from Magnus wasn't quite human. It was grief compressed into a single exhalation, the kind of agony that has no words because language isn't built to contain that much pain. He doubled over, his hands covering his face, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal and unreachable. Solveig wanted to comfort him, wanted to touch his shoulder, say something that would make this bearable. But there were no words for this. No comfort for a man who had just learned that his entire existence was built on his real mother's corpse. "I killed her," Magnus choked out between sobs. "I killed my own mother, and I never even knew she existed. You were a baby. You didn't choose this." But even as Solveig said it, she knew how hollow it sounded, how little it mattered when the weight of that death sat on your shoulders regardless of fault or choice or intention. Did Greta ever regret it? Magnus looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes red and swollen. Did she ever wonder if she made the right choice? Solveig thought of the old midwife, the way she had grown quieter over the years, more withdrawn. The way she would sometimes stare at nothing for hours, her hands trembling slightly, her lips moving in silent conversation with ghosts only she could see. "Every day," Solveig said softly. "I think she regretted it every single day of her life. But she also believed she had saved the kingdom from tearing itself apart. She believed that one life, even an innocent one, was worth sacrificing for thousands." "And what do you believe?" Magnus's voice was sharp now, cutting through the space between them like a blade. "You've carried this secret for 31 years. You've watched me sit on a throne that belongs to a dead man. You've watched me make decisions that affect thousands of lives while knowing I have no right to any of it. What do you believe?" "Solveig?" She couldn't answer. Because the truth was that 6 months ago she had made exactly the same choice Greta had made. She had decided that one life was worth sacrificing for the greater good. She had decided that she knew better than fate, better than God, better than the natural order of things. And now she was sitting across from the man whose real family she had helped destroy twice over. Once when she was 7 years old and silent. Once when she was 30 years old and murderous. "There's more, isn't there?" Magnus was staring at her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. "I can see it in your face. There's something else you're not telling me." Solveig's heart stopped. The room spun. How could he possibly know? How could he sense the weight of a secret she hadn't even hinted at? "I spent a year searching for my family," Magnus said, standing up again, moving toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "I sent scouts to every village, every town, every corner of this kingdom. I had them look for any record of a kitchen maid named Era, any record of her family, her history, anything that might lead me to someone who shared my blood." He stopped directly in front of her, and Solveig could see the muscle twitching in his jaw. "And do you know what they found?" She shook her head, unable to speak, unable to breathe. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was as if she had been erased from history. Magnus crouched down so they were at eye level, and Solveig saw something dangerous flickering in his gaze. "But that's impossible, isn't it? Even the poorest servant leaves some trace. A birth record, a death record, a mention in a ledger somewhere. Unless someone deliberately destroyed every shred of evidence that she ever existed." "I don't know anything about that," Solveig whispered, but the lie tasted like ash on her tongue. "Yes, you do." Magnus reached out and caught her wrist, his grip firm but not painful. "You know something. I can see it eating. You alive. Please, Solveig, please. If there's anything else, if there's any chance that someone from my real family survived, you have to tell me. I'm begging you." And that's when Solveig realized the impossible situation she was in. If she told him the truth, told him that 6 months ago a man claiming to be his brother had appeared with proof of his lineage, Magnus would want to know what happened to him, would want to know where he went, would search until he found the grave in the woods behind her cabin. But if she stayed silent, she would be watching a man torture himself with hope that died half a year ago in this very room. There was someone, she heard herself say, and immediately wanted to claw the words back out of the air. 6 months ago, a man came to my door. Magnus's entire body went rigid. Who? Who was he? Solveig's vision blurred with fresh tears. He said his name was Eric. He said he was Era's nephew. He said he had information about what happened 38 years ago. Where is he? Magnus's voice was shaking now, vibrating with something that might have been hope or might have been the last thread of his sanity fraying. Where can I find him? I need to talk to him. He's dead. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would never stop spreading. He's dead, Magnus, and I'm the one who killed him. Magnus released her wrist as if she had burned him. He stumbled backward, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to name. Shock, horror, disbelief, and finally something that looked like the moment a person's soul breaks in half. The fire popped in the silence that followed, a sharp crack that made them both flinch. You killed him. Magnus's voice was flat, empty, like all the life had been sucked out of it. You killed the only person who could have told me who I really am. Solveig couldn't move, couldn't defend herself, couldn't explain. Her confession hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous, contaminating everything it touched. She had imagined this moment for 6 months, the moment when someone would discover what she'd done. But in her nightmares, it had always been soldiers, judges, executioners. Never this. Never a man staring at her with eyes that held the exact same guilt she saw in her own reflection. Why? The question was barely audible. Magnus's hands were shaking, his whole body trembling with an emotion that seemed too big for his frame to contain. Why would you do that? Because I thought I was saving the kingdom. The words tasted like blood. Solveig forced herself to stand, even though her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. Eric came here 6 months ago with a letter from Greta. A deathbed confession. He said he had proof of the switch. He said he was going to the capital to reveal the truth about your birth. And you stopped him. Magnus's voice was rising now, each word sharper than the last. You stopped him. Because you thought you knew better. Because you thought one man's life was worth less than the stability of a kingdom built on lies. Yes. Solveig met his gaze, forcing herself not to look away even though every instinct screamed at her to run. I thought about what would happen if the truth came out. The nobles who have been waiting for any excuse to seize power. The 3 rival families who would tear this realm apart fighting over the throne. The thousands of innocent people who would die in the war that would follow. So you made yourself judge and executioner. Magnus was pacing now, his movements jerky and uncontrolled, like a marionette with tangled strings. You decided that this Eric, this man who might have been my family, my blood, my only connection to who I really am, deserved to die so that I could keep living a lie. I decided that your 18 years on the throne meant something. Solveig's voice cracked, I decided that the peace you've maintained, the laws you've passed, the lives you've saved, all of that was worth preserving, even if it meant—" She couldn't finish, couldn't say the words that would make it real all over again. Even if it meant murder. Magnus stopped pacing and turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made Solveig want to sink through the floor. "Do you know what's funny? I've spent the last year wishing I was dead, wishing I had never been born, wishing that Greta had just let the real prince die and let the kingdom fall apart naturally, instead of building it on this foundation of switched babies and dead mothers and lies that have poisoned everything they touched." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And now I find out that someone else died specifically to keep me on a throne I never wanted in the first place." Solveig felt something breaking inside her chest. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought—" "You thought you were Greta." Magnus's words cut through her explanation like a knife through silk. "You thought you could make the same impossible choice she made, and somehow it would be noble, heroic, a necessary evil." He moved closer, and Solveig could see tears streaming down his face again. "But did you ever stop to think that maybe, just maybe, some choices aren't ours to make? That maybe some lies are too big, too destructive, too poisonous to maintain, no matter the cost?" Every day. The confession burst out of Solveig like a wound rupturing. "I think about it every single day. I see his face when I close my eyes. I hear the sound of his breathing getting slower, stopping. I feel the weight of the shovel in my hands when I buried him in the woods." Her voice rose to a scream. "I know I'm a murderer. I know I'm damned. But I did it anyway because I thought I was preventing something worse." The cabin fell silent except for the sound of their ragged breathing and the endless crackling of the fire. Magnus stared at her, and Solveig saw something shifting in his expression. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. Recognition, understanding. The terrible knowledge that they were both trapped in the same impossible situation, both drowning in choices that had no right answers. "What did you do with the letter?" Magnus asked suddenly. "The one from Greta. The proof Eric was carrying." Solveig's stomach dropped. "I burned it. I burned everything he brought with him." "Of course you did." Magnus's laugh was bitter. "Of course you destroyed the only evidence that could have given me answers. The only thing that might have told me where I came from, who my real family was, if there was anyone else out there who—" His voice broke. "If there was anyone else who shared my blood. I'm sorry." The words were pathetically inadequate, but they were all Solveig had. "I'm so sorry, Magnus. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting everyone, I thought—" "Stop apologizing." Magnus held up his hand, his face twisting with an emotion that looked like physical pain. "Stop trying to justify it. Stop trying to make it sound like anything other than what it was. You killed a man to preserve a lie, my lie. A lie I would have ended myself if I'd had the courage." He sank back into the chair, his head falling into his hands. "God, Solveig, what have we done? What have we become?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable and devastating. Solveig moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered forest where Eric's body had been, rotting for 6 months, where the earth had swallowed her crime and kept it hidden like a shameful secret. Did he suffer? Magnus's voice was small now, vulnerable in a way that made Solveig's heart contract. When you killed him, did he suffer? No. At least she could give him this one mercy. It was monkshood. He fell asleep and never woke up. He didn't know what was happening. Did he tell you anything about Era's family? About where they came from? About whether there are others? Solveig closed her eyes, trying to remember, trying to pull details from a conversation she had been too panicked to fully absorb. He said Era had a sister, that she had moved north after Era's death to a village called Raven's Hollow. He said the family blamed the castle for what happened, that they believed the servants were worked to death and the nobles didn't care. They were right. Magnus's voice was hollow. They were absolutely right. He said the sister had children, that he was one of them. that he'd grown up hearing stories about his aunt who went to work at the castle and never came home. Solveig turned back to face Magnus, forcing herself to witness the devastation her words were causing. He said he'd spent 10 years searching for the truth, that he'd finally found Greta in her final days and convinced her to write everything down. 10 years. Magnus was staring at nothing, his eyes unfocused and distant. He spent 10 years looking for answers, and you killed him in one night. Yes. And the sister? The one in Raven's Hollow? Did Eric say anything about her name? Anything that might help me find her? Solveig's heart clenched. This was dangerous territory. If Magnus went searching, if he found the family, if they recognized him, if they demanded justice for Eric's disappearance, the web of lies would unravel faster than either of them could contain it. He said her name was Astrid. The name felt heavy on Solveig's tongue. Astrid, Eric's daughter. She would be in her 60s now if she's still alive. Magnus stood up abruptly, his movements sharp and decisive in a way they hadn't been since he'd emerged from the lake. Then that's where I'm going, to Raven's Hollow, to find this Astrid and tell her the truth about what happened to her sister, about what happened to me, about... He stopped, looking at Solveig with an expression that was equal parts rage and desperate plea. About what happened to her son. You can't. The words came out before Solveig could stop them. Magnus, if you go there, if you tell them everything, they'll want to know what happened to Eric. They'll ask questions I can't answer without revealing that you're a murderer. Magnus's voice was cold now, clinical. Yes, Solveig. That's exactly what will happen. And maybe that's exactly what should happen. The words hit Solveig like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her hip connecting with the edge of the table hard enough to leave a bruise. Magnus was watching her with eyes that held no mercy, no compassion, nothing but the cold calculation of a man who had spent 18 years making impossible decisions and had finally found one that felt simple. You would have me executed. Her voice came out strangled, disbelieving. After everything I did to protect you, to protect the kingdom, you would throw me to the wolves. You didn't protect me. Magnus's voice was ice. You protected a lie. You protected a system that never should have existed in the first place. And you did it by murdering the only family I had left in this world. He moved toward the door, reaching for his still damp cloak. I don't owe you protection, Solveig. I don't owe you anything except the same justice you denied Eric. Wait. Solveig's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. He froze, but didn't turn around. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the barely controlled rage that was keeping him upright. If you expose me, you expose yourself. You expose the entire foundation of your reign. Every law you've passed, every treaty you've signed, every decision you've made, all of it becomes void the moment people learn you have no legitimate claim to the throne. Good. Magnus wrenched his arm free and spun to face her. Let it all burn. Let the nobles fight over the ashes. Let the kingdom tear itself apart. At least it will be honest destruction instead of this slow rot built on corpses and secrets. There are children in the capital who eat because of the grain distribution system you established 5 years ago. Solveig was desperate now, her words tumbling over each other. There are villages that have clean water because you funded the well projects. There are families who weren't torn apart by war because you negotiated peace with the northern territories. You want to destroy all of that? For what? For revenge? For the satisfaction of burning down everything you've built? I built nothing. Magnus's roar shook the cabin. A clay pot fell from the shelf, shattering against the floor in a spray of dried lavender. Everything I have, everything I am, was stolen from a dead baby and his mother who drowned herself in grief. I'm a ghost wearing a crown, Solveig. I'm a placeholder for a corpse, and every single day I sit on that throne is an insult to their memory. Then honor their memory by being a good king. Solveig was shaking now, her whole body vibrating with fear and fury and a desperation that felt like claws, tearing at her insides. Honor them by continuing to serve the people who need you. Eric died because I thought your reign was worth preserving. Don't make his death meaningless by throwing it all away." Magnus laughed, and the sound was so broken it barely qualified as human. "You think I care about meaning? You think I care about legacy? I've spent a year drowning in the knowledge that I'm a fraud, and the only thing that kept me going was the hope that maybe somewhere there was someone who could tell me who I really was, someone who shared my blood, someone who could prove that I existed as something other than a convenient replacement." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And you killed him. You took that away from me. You took everything." Solveig felt tears streaming down her face, hot against her cold skin. "I know. God help me, I know. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life. But Magnus, please, think about what you're doing. If you go to Raven's Hollow, if you find..." "Astrid, if you tell her everything, it won't bring Eric back. It won't give you the family you lost. It will only destroy what little stability the kingdom has left. Maybe that's what it deserves." Magnus reached for the door handle. "Maybe that's what we all deserve. And what about the people who had nothing to do with this?" Solveig's voice rose, sharp with panic. "The farmers who will starve when the supply chains collapse during the Civil War? The children who will watch their parents die, fighting over a throne that shouldn't exist? The innocent people who will pay the price for decisions they never made?" Magnus's hand tightened on the door handle until his knuckles went white. Greta asked herself the same questions 38 years ago. She decided that one innocent life was worth sacrificing to save thousands. You asked yourself the same questions 6 months ago. You decided the same thing. He finally looked at her, and Solveig saw something terrifying in his eyes. "Now, I'm asking myself the same questions, and I'm deciding that maybe some prices are too high to pay. Maybe some lies are too destructive to maintain. Maybe the truth, no matter how devastating, is better than living in a kingdom built on corpses." "You're wrong." Solveig moved to block the door, even though she knew it was futile. "You're wrong because you're in pain, and you're angry, and you want someone to suffer the way you're suffering. But Magnus, listen to me. Revenge won't heal you. Destroying everything won't bring Eric back. It won't bring your mother back. It won't make you feel less like a fraud. Then what will?" Magnus's voice cracked. "Tell me, Solveig. You seem to have all the answers. You seem to know exactly what choices everyone should make, and who should live and who should die, and what lies are worth maintaining. So tell me, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to keep pretending I'm a king when I know I'm just a stolen child wearing a dead boy's crown?" The question hung between them, raw and genuine and completely unanswerable. Solveig opened her mouth, closed it, searched desperately for words that could fix this impossible situation. But there were none. There was no wisdom deep enough, no comfort strong enough, no answer clear enough to untangle the knot they had all created. "I don't know," she finally whispered. "I don't know, Magnus. I only know that if you walk out that door right now, if you go to Raven's Hollow and tell Astrid everything, you'll be making the same choice Greta made, the same choice I made. You'll be deciding that your pain, your need for truth, your desire for justice, that all of it matters more than the thousands of lives that hang in the balance. Maybe it does." Magnus's voice was quiet now, drained of anger, empty of everything except exhaustion. "Maybe I'm just as selfish as both of you. Maybe I'm just as willing to watch the world burn if it means I can finally stop drowning in lies." He pulled the door open. Cold air rushed into the cabin, carrying with it the smell of snow and pine and the promise of a winter that would be long and brutal. Solveig watched him step toward the threshold, watched him pause with 1 foot in the cabin and 1 foot outside, caught between 2 impossible choices. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice barely carrying across the small space between them. "Something I didn't tell you." Magnus froze. "What?" "The letter from Greta. Before I burned it, I read it. All of it." Solveig's hands were trembling so badly she had to clasp them together. "She didn't just confess to the switch. She explained why she chose you specifically, why she took you from your mother instead of finding some other peasant baby." Magnus turned slowly, his face pale in the dim light. "Why?" Because Era was King Harold's daughter. The words fell like stones into deep water, creating ripples that would never stop spreading. Illegitimate. Born before he was crowned. Hidden away as a servant to avoid scandal. Greta knew because she had delivered Era herself 30 years before that night. She knew that you weren't just any peasant baby. You were royal blood, just from the wrong side of the sheets. Magnus's face went through a series of emotions too complex to name. You're lying. I'm not. Greta wrote that she chose you because she thought it would be less of a sin, that she was putting royal blood on the throne, even if it was the wrong royal blood, that she was giving you a life you deserved, even if it meant taking it from someone else. Solveig took a shaky breath. Eric knew this too. It's why he was so determined to reveal the truth. He wasn't just trying to restore some peasant family's honor. He was trying to prove that you had as much right to the throne as the prince did. Maybe more, since you were strong enough to survive. Magnus stood in the doorway, the wind whipping his cloak around his legs, his face a mask of shock and confusion, and something that might have been hope trying desperately not to exist. If that's true, then I'm not a complete fraud. I'm not just some stolen placeholder. No, Solveig agreed quietly. You're a bastard wearing a legitimate heir's crown, which is either better or worse, depending on how you look at it. Magnus stumbled backward into the cabin as if the revelation had physically pushed him. The door swung shut behind him, cutting off the wind, but not the chill that had settled into Solveig's bones. She watched him sink onto the chair again, his head in his hands, his breathing rapid and shallow like a man on the edge of panic. King Harold was my father. The words came out strangled, disbelieving. King Harold, who I watched die when I was 20 years old, who I mourned as my father for 18 years, who actually was my father, just not in the way anyone thought. He looked up at Solveig with wild eyes. Did he know? Did he ever suspect? Greta didn't think so. The letter said he'd had dozens of affairs before his marriage. Era was just another servant girl who disappeared from the castle when her pregnancy started to show. He probably never gave her a second thought. Solveig's voice was soft, careful, like she was trying to soothe a wounded animal. But Greta knew. She'd helped arrange Era's transfer to the kitchen staff, helped hide the pregnancy, helped deliver you in secret. So when she switched the babies, she was putting me exactly where I would have been if my mother had been married to the king instead of warming his bed. Magnus's laugh was bitter, caustic. How convenient. How perfectly, terribly convenient. It doesn't make what she did right. Solveig moved closer, lowering herself onto the stool across from him. It doesn't justify the switch or your mother's death or any of the lies that followed. But Magnus, don't you see? You're not an imposter. You're not some random peasant pretending to be. Royalty. You are royal. Your blood, your lineage, your right to rule. It's all real. Just complicated. Complicated. Magnus repeated the word like it was a foreign language. My mother killed herself thinking she'd lost her baby. The real legitimate prince died because Greta decided I was a better option. And I've spent 18 years on a throne I inherited from my own father, while believing I had no right to any of it. That's not complicated, Solveig. That's obscene. Yes, Solveig didn't try to argue. It is. It's obscene and tragic and wrong in ways that don't have names. But it's also the truth. And the truth is that you have royal blood. You have a claim. Maybe not the claim everyone thinks you have, but a claim nonetheless. Magnus stood up abruptly, pacing the small cabin like a caged wolf. And what am I supposed to do with that? Go back to the capital and announce that I'm actually the bastard son of King Harold? That the legitimate heir died 38 years ago and was replaced with his half-brother? That the entire line of succession is built on a lie, but it's okay, because technically I have royal blood anyway? His voice was rising with each question. Do you have any idea how that would sound? The nobles would declare me insane. They'd use it as an excuse to overthrow me and install someone they can control. Then you say nothing. Solveig's words came out sharper than she intended. You go back to the capital and you continue being the king you've been for 18 years. The good king. The just king. The king who has kept this realm together when lesser men would have let it fracture. While knowing I'm living a lie, Magnus stopped pacing and turned to face her. While knowing that somewhere in Raven's Hollow, there's a woman who is my grandmother, who lost her sister and her nephew and who deserves to know the truth about what happened to them both. Astrid doesn't know Eric is dead. Solveig's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. When he left for the capital 6 months ago, he told his family he was going to seek work as a merchant's guard. That's what they believe, that he's somewhere in the southern territories, alive and well, and building a life for himself. Magnus stared at her. So not only did you kill him, you've let his family spend 6 months believing he abandoned them. Yes. The guilt was a physical weight in Solveig's chest, pressing down until she could barely breathe. Because telling them the truth would have meant exposing everything. The switch, your parentage, my crime, all of it. And you thought that was acceptable. Magnus's voice had gone quiet again, which was somehow worse than the shouting. You thought it was acceptable to let an old woman wonder why her grandson never wrote, never visited, never came home. I thought it was better than the alternative. Solveig forced herself to meet his gaze. I thought it was better than plunging the kingdom into civil war. Better than Tao. Watching thousands of people die fighting over a throne that shouldn't exist. Better than, her voice broke, better than admitting I'm a murderer. The silence that followed was suffocating. Magnus stood motionless, his face cycling through emotions Solveig couldn't read. The fire crackled. Snow began to fall outside, visible through the small window, each flake catching the morning light like a tiny fragment of broken glass. I can't go back to the capital, Magnus finally said, his voice hollow. I can't sit on that throne and pretend I don't know what I know. I can't make decisions that affect thousands of lives while carrying this weight. I'll go mad, Solveig. I'll break apart from the inside. Then what will you do? Solveig's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Walk into the lake again? Disappear into the forest? Abandon a kingdom that needs you because the truth is too heavy to bear? Maybe. Magnus moved back to the window, pressing his palm against the cold glass. Maybe that's exactly what I'll do. Let the nobles fight over the throne. Let them discover I was never the legitimate heir. Let them tear themselves apart trying to establish a new line of succession. He turned his head slightly, looking at her from the corner of his eye. At least then I won't be responsible for maintaining a lie that killed 3 people. 4 people. Solveig's correction was quiet but firm. You're forgetting the legitimate prince, the baby who died because Greta decided he wasn't strong enough to be king. I'm not forgetting him. Magnus's reflection in the window looked like a ghost. I think about him every day. I wonder what kind of king he would have been. I wonder if he would have been better than me, kinder than me, wiser than me. I wonder if the kingdom would have been better off with him on the throne, even if his reign had been short. You can't know that. Solveig stood, moving closer but not touching him. You can't torture yourself with hypotheticals about a child who died before he could draw 10 breaths. What matters is what you've done with the life you were given, regardless of how you got it. And what have I done? Magnus's voice was raw with self-loathing. I've maintained a lie. I've sat on a stolen throne. I've made decisions believing I had the authority when I never did. Everything I've built, every law I've passed, every treaty I've signed, all of it is tainted by the knowledge that I have no legitimate right to any of it. You have the right of 18 years of good rule. Solveig's voice was fierce now, almost angry. You have the right of a kingdom that is more prosperous and peaceful now than it was when your father, when King Harold died. You have the right of thousands of people who are alive today because you chose diplomacy over war, mercy over vengeance, justice over expedience. That has to count for something, Magnus. That has to matter. Does it? Magnus turned to face her fully, and Solveig saw tears streaming down his face again. Does it matter when it's all built on corpses? When the foundation of everything I am is a dead baby and his grieving mother and a man you murdered to keep the secret buried? I don't know. Solveig's own tears were flowing now, hot and bitter. I don't know if it matters. I don't know if anything we've done can be justified or forgiven or even understood by anyone who wasn't there, who didn't have to make those impossible choices. But I know that throwing it all away won't bring any of them back. It won't resurrect the prince or save Era or restore Eric to life. It will only add more death to the pile. Magnus wiped his face with the back of his hand, a gesture so vulnerable it made Solveig's heart ache. I need time. I need to think. I need to figure out what the right choice is here, if there even is a right choice. How much time? Solveig's voice was small, frightened. How long before someone comes looking? For you? Before the guards realize you're missing? Before the nobles start plotting to take advantage of your absence? I told my advisors I was going hunting in the northern woods for a week, that I needed solitude to think about matters of state. Magnus's smile was bitter. At least that part was true. I just didn't plan on surviving long enough to return. A week. Solveig's mind raced. That gives us 7 days to figure out what to do. 7 days to decide whether you go back to the EU capital and continue ruling, or whether you... She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't speak the alternative into existence. Or whether I destroy everything. Magnus completed the thought for her. Yes. 7 days to decide whether a kingdom built on lies deserves to stand, or whether the truth, no matter how devastating, is more important than stability. 3 days passed like a slow death. Magnus stayed in the cabin, sleeping on the floor near the fire, speaking only when necessary, his eyes carrying the hollow look of a man watching his own life from a great distance. Solveig moved through her routines mechanically, grinding herbs, preparing meals neither of them ate, stoking the fire that never seemed to chase away the cold that had settled into the space between them. On the 4th morning, Solveig woke to find Magnus standing at the window, fully dressed in the clothes she had dried and mended. The early light painted him in shades of gray and gold, and for a moment he looked exactly like what he was, a king preparing for battle. I'm going to Raven's Hollow, he said without turning around. I need to see her. I need to look Astrid in the eyes and know that she's real, that some part of my mother's family survived. Solveig's stomach dropped. She sat up too quickly, her head spinning. Magnus, please, think about what you're doing. If you go there, if she recognizes you, she won't. Magnus finally turned, and Solveig saw that his face had changed over the past 3 days. The desperate, broken quality had hardened into something else. Resolution, purpose, the kind of determination that comes when a man decides he has nothing left to lose. I'll tell her I'm a merchant passing through, that I knew Eric briefly before he disappeared, that I wanted to pay my respects to his family. And if she asks questions, if she wants to know details about where you met him, what he was doing, why he never came home. Solveig's voice was rising, panic threading through every word. You'll be walking into a situation you can't control, Magnus. One wrong word and everything unravels. Maybe it should unravel. Magnus moved toward the door, reaching for his cloak. Maybe 38 years of lies is long enough. Maybe it's time for the truth, no matter the cost. You said you needed 7 days to think. Solveig jumped to her feet, blocking his path. It's only been 3. You're not thinking clearly. You're acting out of grief and guilt and a desperate need to feel connected to something real. And you're acting out of fear. Magnus's voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. Fear that I'll expose your crime. Fear that everything you did to protect this kingdom will be revealed as murder dressed up in noble intentions. Yes. Solveig didn't try to deny it. Yes, I'm afraid. I'm terrified. Because I know what will happen if the truth comes out. I've spent 6 months imagining it. The trial. The execution. The knowledge that I'll die. Knowing I destroyed everything I was trying to save. Her hands were shaking. But I'm also afraid for you, Magnus. I'm afraid you're about to make a decision that will haunt you for whatever time you have left. I'm already haunted. Magnus's eyes held a pain so deep it seemed to have no bottom. Every moment I sit on that throne, I feel their ghosts. The prince who should have lived. Era who died believing she'd lost everything. Eric, who died because someone decided his truth was too dangerous to exist. He reached out and gently moved Solveig aside. At least if I meet Astrid, I'll know that some part of them survived, that their blood, their memory, their existence meant something to someone. Solveig watched him open the door, watched the cold morning air rush in, watched him step toward a decision that would change everything. And in that moment, she made a choice that surprised even herself. "I'm coming with you." Magnus froze on the threshold. "What?" "I'm coming with you to Raven's Hollow." Solveig grabbed her own cloak from the hook by the door. "If you're determined to do this, if nothing I say will change your mind, then I'm not letting you go alone. I'm not letting you walk into that village and potentially destroy both our lives without me there to—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "To face the consequences together. You think you can stop me from telling her the truth?" Magnus's voice held a dangerous edge. "You think you can control what I say, what I reveal?" "No." Solveig met his gaze without flinching. "But I think if you're going to destroy everything, you should have to look me in the eyes while you do it. You should have to see exactly what your truth costs. Not just in abstract terms of kingdoms and stability, but in the face of the woman who murdered to protect it." She stepped closer. "If you're going to be the instrument of my execution, Magnus, then I want to watch you make that choice. I want to see if you can do it, while looking at me instead of hiding behind righteous anger and grief." For a long moment, Magnus said nothing. He stared at her with an expression Solveig couldn't read, something complicated and painful and almost like respect. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Fine, but we leave now and we travel fast. Raven's Hollow is 2 days north by horse, 3 on foot. I want to be there before I lose my nerve." They prepared in silence. Solveig packed bread and dried meat, a water skin, a small knife she told herself was only for cutting food. Magnus found his horse, a massive gray stallion he'd left tethered in a clearing half a mile from the cabin, and they set out into the forest as the sun climbed higher, painting the snow in colors that were too beautiful for what they were about to do. They walked for hours without speaking, Magnus leading the horse while Solveig followed. The forest was silent except for the crunch of their boots and the occasional cry of a bird. Solveig's mind raced, playing out 1,000 scenarios, each one worse than the last. What would she say if Astrid demanded to know what happened to Eric? What would she do if Magnus told the truth right there in front of witnesses? Would she run? Would she confess? Would she beg for mercy she didn't deserve? As the sun began to set on the first day, they stopped to make camp in a small clearing. Magnus built a fire while Solveig unpacked their meager supplies. They ate without tasting, each lost in thoughts, too heavy to share. "Tell me about him," Magnus said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since morning. "Tell me about Eric. What was he like before you killed him?" The question was brutal in its directness, and Solveig felt it like a physical blow. But she also recognized it for what it was, a test. Magnus wanted to see if she could talk about Eric as a person instead of an obstacle, wanted to see if she felt genuine remorse or just fear of consequences. "He was kind," Solveig said quietly, staring into the fire. "That's what struck me first. He came to my door in the middle of a storm, soaked to the bone, and the first thing he did was apologize for disturbing me. He spoke about Era with such love, such reverence. He said she was the best person in their family, that everyone who knew her said she had a light that drew people in." Her voice cracked. "He said that light went out the day she died, and the family never fully recovered." Magnus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "He showed me the letter from Greta, read parts of it aloud because his hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. He cried when he talked about how his grandmother Astrid still kept Era's things in a trunk under her bed. A lock of hair, a ribbon, a small wooden bird Era had carved as a child." Solveig wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He said he was going to the capital not for revenge or power, but because he thought you deserved to know the truth. He thought you had a right to know where you came from, and you killed him for that." Magnus's voice was flat, emotionless. "For wanting to give me the truth." I killed him because I was afraid of what that truth would do. Solveig forced herself to look at Magnus, to see the pain and anger in his face. I killed him because I thought I knew better. Because I thought one life was worth sacrificing to save thousands. Because I was a coward who chose the easier path and dressed it up as heroism. Magnus stood abruptly, pacing the small clearing. Do you know what the worst part is? I understand. God help me. I understand exactly why you did it. Because I've made similar choices. Not murder, but choices where I decided someone's suffering was acceptable if it meant protecting something larger. He stopped, turning to face her. 3 years ago, I approved a new tax on the northern villages to fund defenses against raiders. I knew it would cause hardship. I knew some families would go hungry that winter. But I told myself it was necessary, that protecting the border was worth the price. That's not the same, Solveig said softly. Isn't it? Magnus's laugh was bitter. I made a choice that caused suffering. I decided my judgment of what was necessary mattered more than the immediate pain I was causing. The only difference is I used policy instead of poison. He sank back down by the fire. We're both killers, Solveig. We've just killed in different ways. Raven's Hollow appeared through the morning mist like something from a half-remembered dream. Small cottages with thatched roofs clustered around a frozen stream, smoke curling from chimneys into a sky that threatened snow. It was the kind of village that existed everywhere and nowhere, ordinary in every way except for the fact that it held the last living connection to Magnus's real mother. Solveig felt her heart hammering against her ribs as they walked down the muddy main road. Every face that turned toward them felt like an accusation. Every pair of eyes that tracked their progress felt like they could see straight through to the guilt that had carved itself into her bones. Magnus walked beside her with his hood pulled low, his posture deliberately hunched to disguise the bearing that marked him as nobility. The cottage with the blue door, a young boy told them when Magnus asked where they could find Astrid Erik's daughter. At the edge of the village. But she doesn't like visitors. Much. Not since her grandson left and never came back. The words hit Solveig like a fist to the stomach. Magnus's face remained neutral, but she saw his hands clench at his sides. They walked in silence to the cottage, each step feeling like a march toward execution. When they finally stood before the blue door, Magnus paused, his hand raised to knock, his whole body rigid with tension. Last chance, Solveig whispered. We can turn around. We can go back. No one has to know we were here. Magnus knocked. 3 sharp raps that sounded like thunder in the quiet morning. The door opened to reveal a woman in her mid-60s, with iron-gray hair and eyes the same shade as Magnus's. The same shade as the king's portrait that hung in every public building in the realm. Solveig felt the world tilt, felt reality fracture into something surreal and terrible. The resemblance was undeniable. This woman was looking at a ghost of the granddaughter she'd lost 40 years ago. I'm not buying anything, Astrid said, her voice rough but not unkind. And if you're here about the harvest tax, I already paid it. We're not here about taxes, Magnus said, and Solveig heard the tremor in his voice, the barely controlled emotion. My name is Thomas. I'm a merchant from the southern territories. I knew your grandson, Erik. The change in Astrid's face was instantaneous and devastating. Her eyes went wide, her hand flying to her mouth. You knew Erik? You've seen him? Is he alive? Is he... Well, the questions tumbled out, desperate and hopeful, and Solveig wanted to die right there on the doorstep. May we come in? Magnus asked gently. It's a long story, and I'd rather not tell it in the cold. Astrid ushered them inside, her hands shaking as she poured weak tea into chipped cups. The cottage was small but immaculately clean, every surface scrubbed until it shone. On a shelf above the fireplace sat a small wooden bird, delicate and perfect, its wings spread as if frozen. Mid-flight. Solveig recognized it from Erik's description and felt bile rising in her throat. Tell me, Astrid said, settling into a worn chair. Tell me everything about my Erik. When did you see him last? Is he coming home soon? It's been 6 months and not a single letter. I've been so worried. Magnus opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Solveig with an expression that held equal parts anguish and accusation. This was the moment where he would either tell the truth and destroy everything, or continue the lie and destroy himself. Solveig made a decision that surprised them both. "He's dead," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the terror flooding through her. "Eric is dead, and I'm the one who killed him." The silence that followed was absolute. Astrid's cup slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor in a spray of tea and ceramic. Magnus stared at Solveig with shock written across every feature, and Solveig felt something breaking inside her chest. Something that had been holding her together for 6 months finally giving way. "What?" Astrid's voice was barely a whisper. "What did you say?" "6 months ago, Eric came to my cabin with a letter. A confession from a midwife named Greta about something that happened 38 years ago. Something about babies being switched and identities being stolen, and truths that could tear a kingdom apart." Solveig was shaking now, but her voice remained steady. "I gave him poisoned tea because I thought his truth was too dangerous. Because I thought one life was worth sacrificing to prevent a war. Because I was a coward who believed she knew better than fate." Astrid stood, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to name. "You're lying. You're insane. She looked at Magnus, really looked at him for the first time, and Solveig saw the moment recognition dawned. You're... But that's impossible." Magnus slowly pulled back his hood. In the firelight, with his features fully visible, the resemblance to Astrid was unmistakable. The same eyes, the same cheekbones, the same slight curve to the mouth. He looked like her daughter come back from the dead. "My name is Magnus," he said quietly. "And everything she said is true. Eric came to expose the fact that I'm not the legitimate heir to the throne. That 38 years ago, a midwife switched me with the real prince because I was stronger, healthier, more likely to survive. That my real mother was a woman named Ira, who worked in the castle kitchens. That she was your sister." Astrid collapsed back into her chair, her face drained of all color. "Ira," she whispered. "My Ira. She always said that baby died. She always said she held him while he took his last breaths. But he didn't die, did he? He became a king. And my Ira died for nothing. Not for nothing." Magnus's voice cracked. "She died because of a terrible choice someone else made. A choice that's poisoned everything it touched for. Nearly 4 decades. But she didn't die for nothing, because her son, because I lived, I survived. I became someone who could make decisions that affected thousands of lives. And whether that's worth her death, whether any of this is justified or forgivable or even comprehensible, I don't know. I don't think I'll ever know. And my grandson." Astrid's eyes fixed on Solveig with an intensity that felt like being flayed alive. "My Eric who went looking for answers? You killed him for trying to tell the truth?" "Yes." Solveig felt tears streaming down her face but made no move to wipe them away. "I killed him because I was afraid, because I thought I was protecting something larger than one life, because I made the same choice Greta made 38 years ago. And it's destroyed me, just like it destroyed her. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for understanding. I'm just telling you the truth because you deserve to know what happened to your grandson, and because I can't carry this alone anymore." Astrid stood again, moving toward Solveig with slow, deliberate steps. For a moment, Solveig thought the old woman might strike her, might scream, might do any of the 100 things she had every right to do. Instead, Astrid reached out and took Solveig's face in her hands, forcing her to meet her gaze. "You think confession makes it better?" Astrid's voice was soft but sharp as broken glass. "You think telling me the truth absolves you of anything? My grandson is dead. My sister died believing she'd lost her child. And you both stand here in my home, breathing air they should be breathing, living lives they should be living. And you think honesty makes that acceptable? No." Solveig's voice broke. "No, I don't think anything makes it acceptable. I think what I did was unforgivable. I think I deserve whatever punishment you want to inflict. I think you need to leave." Astrid released Solveig's face and stepped back, her expression hard as stone. Both of you. I think you need to walk out of my home and out of this village and never come back. Because if you stay, if I have to look at you for one more moment, I will do something we'll all regret. Astrid, please. Magnus started, but the old woman cut him off with a sharp gesture. You're not my grandson. Eric was my grandson. That boy who came to me with questions about his aunt, who listened to my stories about Era, who cried with me over a woman he never met. He was my family. Not you. Not, some king wearing stolen skin and calling it birthright. Her voice rose, sharp with pain. You want to honor Era's memory? Then do something with the life she unwillingly gave you. Be the kind of king that makes her death mean something. And you, she turned back to Solveig. You want redemption? Then live with what you did. Don't hide from it. Don't let yourself forget for even a moment that you're alive because someone else isn't. Magnus and Solveig stumbled out of the cottage into snow that had begun to fall, thick and heavy. Behind them, they heard the sound of Astrid weeping, raw and broken and completely alone. They walked in silence back through the village, through the forest, into a world that had fundamentally changed in the space of an hour. When they finally stopped to rest, Magnus turned to Solveig with eyes that held something new. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but perhaps a recognition that they were both trapped in the same impossible situation. Both drowning in choices that had no right answers. I'm going back to the capital, he said quietly. I'm going to be the king Astrid demanded. The king that makes all of this mean something. And you're going to live with what you did, just like she said. He paused. But Solveig, if you ever do anything like this again, if you ever decide one person's life is worth less than your vision of the greater good, I will personally ensure you face justice. Do you understand? Yes, Solveig whispered. I understand. They parted ways at the edge of the forest. Magnus rode toward the capital and the crown waiting for him. Solveig walked back to her cabin and the ghost that would haunt her for the rest of her days. Sometimes the heaviest choices we make are the ones where every option leads to someone suffering. Solveig believed she was protecting thousands by sacrificing one, but in the end, she discovered that playing God comes with a price no human soul was meant to bear. Magnus learned that truth, no matter how devastating, cannot be outrun, not even by drowning in a frozen lake. And Astrid was left with the cruelest knowledge of all, that the people we love can be taken from us not by fate, but by someone else's decision that their life mattered less than a greater cause. 3 people, 3 impossible burdens, and a kingdom built on secrets that poisoned everyone they touched. The question that haunts us isn't whether they made the right choices, but whether any choice in situations like these can ever truly be called right. What would you have done in Solveig's place when a man appeared at your door with a truth that could destroy everything? Would you have had the courage to let him speak, knowing it might plunge a kingdom into war? Or would you have made the same terrible calculation she did, convincing yourself that one life was an acceptable price for thousands? And if you were Magnus, could you continue to rule knowing your entire existence was built on the corpse of an innocent child and the suicide of your real mother? Could you wear a crown that was never meant for you? Or would you too walk into those freezing waters seeking an escape from a lie too heavy to carry? These are questions without comfortable answers. Questions that force us to confront the terrifying reality that sometimes good people make monstrous choices. And sometimes the only difference between a hero and a villain is whose story we're hearing. If this story made you feel something, if it left you questioning what you would do in their place, then it served its purpose. Stories like these exist not to give us easy answers, but to remind us that the weight of impossible choices is something we all carry in different ways. Leave a like if this tale moved you. Share it with someone who appreciates stories that challenge the soul. And follow for more narratives that will make you think long after the final words have been spoken. Because the most powerful stories aren't the ones that tell us what to think. They're the ones that force us to confront who we are when faced with choices that have no right answers.